They blocked my driveway for weeks until I called the sheriff. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I watched the fifth tow truck hook up my neighbor's car, sipping my coffee as he screamed my name. Kyle's face was purple, veins popping in his neck, as heavy steel chains rattled against the pavement. He was shouting something about lawyers, about how I ruined his life, but his voice was drowned out by the beautiful, mechanical roar of diesel engines hauling away his illegal empire piece by piece. To understand how we got to this glorious morning, you need to understand what this house meant to me. I'm 29, and I work in emergency IT infrastructure. When hospital servers crash or 911 dispatch centers lose their routing databases, my pager goes off. I have exactly 15 minutes to be in my car, securely connected to a mobile hotspot, or driving at breakneck speed to a server farm. My job is literally life, death, and data. Because of that, my driveway isn't just a place to park. It's my launch pad. It's my absolute lifeline. Buying this house took 5 years of eating instant ramen, skipping vacations, and working 80-hour weeks. It was a modest 3-bedroom ranch at the end of a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac. It was perfect. No street traffic, no loud parties, just a peaceful suburban haven where I could sleep soundly between chaotic on-call shifts. The driveway was wide, pristine, and entirely mine. When I signed the mortgage papers, I felt like I had finally made it. I had my own castle, complete with a paved moat. For the first 6 months, life was idyllic. I waved to the neighbors, mowed my lawn on Sundays, and enjoyed the silence. The house next door had been sitting empty, tied up in a messy estate probate, until one crisp Tuesday morning when a massive moving truck backed over the curb. I watched from my kitchen window as Kyle and his wife, Brittany, directed the movers. They seemed like a normal couple. Kyle had a slick, polished look, always wearing designer sunglasses and expensive polo shirts, while Brittany had that hyper-curated suburban mom aesthetic. I walked over with a 6-pack of craft beer to introduce myself. We shook hands. He called me bro about 4 times in 2 minutes. He seemed overly confident, bragging about his vague investments and how he was looking forward to dominating the local market. I just wanted peace. I had no idea the nightmare living next door was just about to begin. It took exactly 4 days for the honeymoon phase of neighborly bliss to shatter into pieces. I was getting ready to head to the grocery store on a lazy Saturday afternoon. I grabbed my keys, walked out my front door, and stopped dead in my tracks. Parked at a sharp, aggressive angle was a heavily rusted Honda Civic. The front bumper was completely sheared off, and the rear end was jutting out a full 3 feet into my meticulously edged driveway. It wasn't just a tight squeeze. It was completely blocking my exit path. Have you ever felt that initial, confusing flash of irritation when someone violates your personal space? I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just a simple mistake. They were new to the neighborhood. Maybe they had guests helping them unpack. I walked over to Kyle's freshly painted front door and knocked gently. Brittany answered, holding a meticulously groomed doodle dog. I put on my best customer service smile and explained the situation. "Oh my gosh, I am so incredibly sorry," she cooed, her tone dripping with a sugary sweetness that felt entirely rehearsed. "Let me go grab my husband." A moment later, Kyle strolled to the door, a half-eaten protein bar in his hand. He looked past me at the Honda, then back at me, entirely unfazed by the metal heap parked on my property. "My bad, bro," he chuckled, slapping my shoulder in a way that felt entirely unearned. "Just having a buddy drop off a project car. It'll just be there for 5 minutes, I promise. We're just moving some boxes around in the garage." I nodded, trying to be the accommodating neighbor. "No problem, just let me know when it's moved so I can run my errands," I replied. I walked back to my house feeling somewhat validated. He admitted the fault. He promised a quick fix, and peace was maintained. I sat on my couch and turned on the television, waiting for the sound of an engine starting up next door. 30 minutes went by, then an hour, then 2 hours. I looked out the window. The Honda hadn't moved an inch, and Kyle was nowhere to be seen. That was the moment I realized his promises were absolutely worthless. Over the next 3 weeks, that singular rusty Honda turned into a revolving door of automotive junk. Every few days, a different battered vehicle would magically appear along the curb, inevitably encroaching onto my property line. There was a dented Toyota Camry that smelled faintly of mildew, a Ford pickup truck with a shattered windshield, and a Nissan Altima that looked like it had survived a demolition derby. Each new arrival meant a new sliver of my driveway was sacrificed to Kyle's expanding mechanical graveyard. My initial polite knocks on his front door morphed from friendly requests into frustrating daily chores. I was literally building extra time into my morning routine just to negotiate my exit. "Hey Kyle, I need to get to work," I would say, standing on his porch in the freezing morning air. The slick apologies quickly evaporated, replaced by heavy sighs and irritated eye rolls. "Come on, Mark, you have plenty of room if you just swing wide," he groaned one Tuesday, pointing vaguely at my lawn. He actually wanted me to drive over my own landscaping to accommodate his junk. The gaslighting was truly incredible to witness. When I finally caught Brittany checking her mail and expressed my mounting frustration, the mask of the sweet suburban mom slipped entirely. She crossed her arms, her diamond ring catching the sunlight, and stared at me with pure disdain. "You know, Mark, you really need to be a little more flexible," she scoffed, tilting her head condescendingly. "We're trying to establish ourselves here, and you're making a massive deal out of a few inches of concrete. It's not very neighborly of you to constantly harass us over parking." I was stunned into silence. I was the one being harassed. I was the one held hostage on my own property, yet somehow, in their twisted reality, I was the villain. I retreated to my house, my blood boiling with a newfound, searing anger. The casual disrespect was infuriating, but the real danger was yet to come. Later that evening, my work pager buzzed with a critical database failure alert. I grabbed my laptop bag and sprinted outside, staring at the fresh, impossible disaster waiting in the dark. A massive, dented white utility van was parked so deep into my driveway that I physically couldn't open my driver's side door. I had to climb through the passenger seat, sweating and cursing, to make it to the server crisis on time. The next morning, the gloves came off. I went straight to the hardware store and purchased a high-definition, night vision security camera. I mounted it directly above my garage, pointing straight at the property line. I also bought a highly visible metal "no parking" tow-away zone sign and bolted it to the wooden post at the edge of my lawn. I thought the visual deterrence would finally establish a firm boundary. I was completely wrong. When Kyle came home that afternoon and saw the camera, he didn't back down. He escalated. I watched the live feed on my phone from my living room couch. He stood on the sidewalk, staring directly into the lens with a smug, arrogant grin. He then walked over to a beaten-up Hyundai Elantra, fired up the engine, and deliberately backed it up until the rear bumper was resting exactly 1 inch away from my car's grill. He turned off the car, locked it, and strutted into his house. My heart pounded against my ribs. I threw open my front door and marched across the lawn. "Move it, right now," I demanded, my voice shaking with adrenaline as he turned around on his porch. Kyle slowly lowered his sunglasses, looking at me like I was an annoying insect. "Move what, bro?" he smirked. "It's a public street. I can park wherever I want. Your little camera and cute little sign don't mean anything out here." "You are literally blocking me in again," I fired back, pointing at the cars. "This ends today. Do not test my patience, Kyle." He stepped off his porch, closing the distance between us until he was uncomfortably close. The smell of cheap cologne and stale smoke wafted off his shirt. "Or what, Mark?" he whispered, his eyes narrowing into cold, aggressive slits. "You gonna cry to the city? You think they care about a couple of inches of driveway space? Go back inside before you embarrass yourself." I knew in that moment that reasoning with him was utterly impossible. I spent the next 3 days practically hyperventilating every time I looked out the front window. Kyle had declared a turf war, and I was losing my mind trying to navigate the blockade. On Thursday afternoon, I was checking the mail when I heard a sharp whistle from across the street. I looked up to see Mrs. Higgins standing on her pristine front porch, vigorously waving a floral-patterned cane in my direction. Mrs. Higgins had lived in her house for 40 years. She was the undisputed matriarch of the cul-de-sac, a 70-something widow who saw everything and forgot absolutely nothing. I jogged across the asphalt to meet her. "That new boy is absolute trash," she declared without preamble, her sharp eyes darting toward Kyle's house. "I've been watching him torture you all week, dear." I let out a heavy sigh of relief, grateful that someone else was witnessing this insanity. "It's a nightmare," I admitted. He thinks he owns the entire street. Mrs. Higgins leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. It's not just bad parking, Mark. He's up to something incredibly sketchy. Have you been awake at 3 in the morning? I shook my head, explaining that I usually slept like a rock unless my work pager woke me up. Well, I don't sleep, she stated proudly. Twice this week, a massive industrial flatbed tow truck came rolling in with its headlights entirely off. It dropped off those junkers right on the curb and slipped away before sunrise. Cash changes hands in the dark. He isn't collecting cars for a hobby. He is running a dirty business out of that house. My jaw practically hit the pavement. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The constant rotation of vehicles, the lack of license plates, the defensive aggression when confronted. He wasn't just an entitled neighbor with too many vehicles. He was operating an unpermitted, commercial scrapyard on residential property. I thanked Mrs. Higgins profusely, my mind racing with this massive new piece of the puzzle. I walked back to my house with a singular, burning purpose. I booted up my computer and prepared to dig through the digital dirt. I brewed a massive pot of coffee, cracked my knuckles, and opened the cloud storage interface for my driveway security camera. It was time to stop reacting and start investigating. For 6 uninterrupted hours, I scrubbed backward through weeks of high-definition video footage. I created a heavily encrypted spreadsheet and started logging every single detail with the precision of a forensic accountant. I recorded dates, timestamps, vehicle makes and models, and exact estimates of how far each car crossed my property line. Mrs. Higgins was absolutely right. The footage showed a heavy-duty flatbed arriving in the dead of night, quietly sliding battered sedans off the ramp before speeding away into the darkness. I captured crystal-clear screenshots of Kyle handing wads of cash to the tow truck drivers under the dim glow of the street lamp. But I needed more than just parking violations. I needed proof of commerce. I opened up Facebook Marketplace and began filtering for used cars listed within a 5-mile radius of our zip code. It didn't take long to strike gold. I found a profile under the name K-Dog Auto Sales, featuring a stock photo of a sports car as the profile picture. There, glaring back at me from the screen, were the exact same cars that had been blocking my driveway. The rusty Honda Civic, the moldy Toyota Camry, the dented Elantra. They were all listed for cash-only sales, explicitly stating no title, bill of sale only. Kyle was title jumping. He was buying junk cars under the table, doing 0 actual repairs, and flipping them illegally without registering them to avoid paying taxes or dealer fees. He was using the public street as his personal commercial showroom and my driveway as his overflow lot. The sheer audacity of the operation was staggering. I took screenshots of every single listing, cross-referencing the photos with the timestamps from my security camera to create an unbreakable timeline of events. I compiled everything into a digital folder titled Operation Eviction. I finally had the ammunition I needed to fight back. I just needed him to make one more careless mistake. The opportunity for a final confrontation presented itself the very next afternoon. I was taking out the trash when Kyle emerged from his garage, wiping grease off his hands with a dirty rag. The driveway was currently being choked by a silver minivan with shattered tail lights. I marched right up to the property line, abandoning any pretense of neighborly politeness. "Business must be booming, Kyle," I said loudly, my voice echoing off the brick facades of our houses. He stopped wiping his hands, his head snapping toward me. "Excuse me," he countered, his posture immediately stiffening. "K-Dog Auto Sales," I replied, enunciating every single syllable with absolute clarity. "I know exactly what you're doing here. You're running an illegal, unlicensed dealership, title-jumping junk cars, and using my property as your commercial overflow lot." For a fraction of a second, genuine panic flashed across his eyes. The slick, arrogant facade cracked, revealing the nervous con artist underneath. But it was fleeting. The panic quickly morphed into a terrifying, unhinged amusement. He threw his head back and actually laughed out loud. It was a cold, grating sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Wow, you really are a pathetic little nerd, aren't you?" he sneered, stepping closer until his steel-toed boots were touching the edge of my grass. "You spent your weekend playing detective?" Newsflash, Mark. The police don't care about a stupid parking dispute. The city code enforcers are entirely underfunded and overworked. Nobody is going to come save you. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a menacing growl. "I own this street now. If you ever threaten my livelihood again, I will make sure you can never back your car out of that driveway safely. Accidents happen to nice cars all the time." He was openly threatening my property. He felt completely untouchable, utterly convinced that his intimidation tactics would force me back into a state of silent submission. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked inside my house, and locked the heavy deadbolt behind me. I knew the final battle was rapidly approaching. 3 days later, the tension in the cul-de-sac reached an absolute boiling point. It was exactly 2 a.m. on a freezing Tuesday when the piercing, high-pitched scream of my emergency pager shattered the silence of my bedroom. I jolted awake, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. I grabbed the device from my nightstand, squinting against the harsh backlight. It was a Severity 1 critical alert from the regional hospital network. Their central routing servers had suffered a catastrophic failure, meaning doctors couldn't access patient records, and the emergency room dispatch was completely flying blind. I had a maximum of 15 minutes to get to the downtown data center and initiate a manual override, or people were going to face life-threatening delays. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my heavy encrypted laptop bag, and practically flew out the front door into the biting winter air. I hit the button on my keys to unlock my car, but as the headlights flashed on, illuminating the darkness, my blood instantly ran cold. Parked completely horizontally across the base of my driveway was a massive, dual-axle commercial box truck. It had no license plates, no company logos, and it was deliberately positioned to box me in entirely. There wasn't even enough room to squeeze a bicycle past its rusted bumper. Kyle had escalated from mere inconvenience to outright sabotage. My mind raced with panic. Every second ticking by was a violation of my service level agreement, a failure that could cost me my job and endanger patients. I desperately calculated my options. I couldn't drive over the lawn because the winter mud would trap my tires instantly. I was effectively held hostage on my own property. The adrenaline surged through my veins, hot and sharp, transforming my rising panic into a furious, unyielding rage. I dropped my heavy laptop bag directly onto the frosty pavement and sprinted across the dark lawn toward Kyle's house. I was no longer interested in preserving the peace or being a good neighbor. I was going to force him to fix this right now. I hammered my fists against Kyle's front door with enough force to rattle the glass panes. "Kyle, open the damn door." I roared into the quiet, freezing night, no longer caring if I woke up the entire street. After nearly 2 agonizing minutes of relentless pounding, the porch light flicked on, casting a harsh yellow glare. The door swung open slowly. Kyle stood in the doorway wearing silk pajamas, rubbing his eyes with an utterly infuriating, theatrical yawn. Brittany was standing behind him, clutching her robe with a dramatic look of faux terror. "What is your absolute problem, man?" Kyle slurred, pretending to be deeply inconvenienced. "Move the box truck right now," I yelled, pointing wildly toward my driveway. "I have a medical IT emergency. Lives are literally on the line. I am completely blocked in." Kyle slowly looked past me at the massive truck, then looked back at me, a slow, malicious smirk spreading across his face. He wasn't asleep. He had been waiting for this. "Man, that is really crazy," he said smoothly, leaning against the doorframe. "I'd love to help you out, bro, but the crazy thing is, the guy who dropped that off lost the keys in the grass somewhere. Can't move it until the locksmith gets here tomorrow afternoon. Tough break." He was lying directly to my face. His sheer audacity left me speechless. I looked at my watch. I was completely out of time. I pulled out my phone, requested a premium emergency Uber, and paid a brutal $150 surge fee just to get to the downtown servers on time. Kyle chuckled softly, slowly closing his front door in my face. The sound of the deadbolt clicking shut echoed in the quiet street. I stood shivering in the dark, watching the Uber's headlights approach. I barely managed to stabilize the hospital servers that night, receiving a furious reprimand from my boss for my delayed response. Sitting in the sterile glow of the data center, I made a silent, unbreakable promise. He wanted a war, and I would give it to him. When I finally returned home the next morning, the box truck was miraculously gone, replaced by a rusted Jeep Cherokee that was once again bleeding over my property line. Kyle thought he had won. He thought he had established absolute dominance over our shared boundary. Instead, he had merely finalized his own demise. I took 2 days of paid leave from work, completely locked myself inside my house, and transformed my dining room table into a strategic war room. I wasn't going to call local parking enforcement or the toothless municipal code inspectors. I was building a case for the heavy hitters. I bought a massive, 3-inch black binder and started meticulously assembling the ultimate weapon. Section 1 contained 40 consecutive days of exported, time-stamped security camera footage burned onto a flash drive, detailing every single illegal late-night drop-off. Section 2 held printed color copies of over 15 different illegal car listings from his fake Facebook profiles, proving his commercial intent and title-jumping fraud. Section 3 was the most damning. I visited the county records office and obtained certified copies of our exact property line maps, alongside highlighted copies of the strict city ordinances forbidding unlicensed commercial salvage operations in residential zones. I even documented the heavy oil stains leaking from his junk cars directly into the municipal storm drains, which violated strict environmental protection laws. I spent hours cross-referencing license plates visible in the footage with a public database, discovering that at least 2 of the vehicles had been reported as abandoned or stolen in neighboring counties. The binder grew thicker and heavier, a physical manifestation of my concentrated rage and sheer exhaustion. I organized it with neon tabs, a table of contents, and a typed executive summary. I held the binder in my hands, feeling the weight of the undeniable, bulletproof evidence. I poured myself a final cup of black coffee, sat down at my kitchen counter, and finally picked up my phone. I bypassed the standard local dispatch numbers and dialed a very specific contact. I dialed the direct line for the county sheriff's non-emergency investigations unit, a number I had acquired during my extensive research into local jurisdiction codes. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, gravelly voice answered. Sheriff's Office, Deputy Miller speaking. I took a deep, steadying breath. I knew exactly how to pitch this to ensure a rapid response. Deputy Miller, my name is Mark. I'm a resident out in the Whispering Pines subdivision. I'm calling to report an ongoing, large-scale, unlicensed commercial auto sales operation, severe environmental dumping, and the potential trafficking of stolen vehicles right on my street. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The magic words had worked. I hadn't complained about a blocked driveway. I had reported serious, multi-jurisdictional crimes. That's quite a list of accusations, son, Deputy Miller replied, his tone shifting from bored to intensely curious. What kind of proof do you have for this? I smiled, tracing my fingers over the thick black cover of my binder. I have 40 days of time-stamped video surveillance, 15 matching fraudulent online sales listings demonstrating title jumping, certified property line maps, and photographic evidence of hazardous motor oil being intentionally dumped into the city storm drains. I heard the distinct sound of a chair squeaking as Miller leaned forward at his desk. Hold on, you built a whole case file? He asked, a hint of genuine respect creeping into his gruff voice. Yes, sir, I answered confidently. And the suspect currently has 4 unregistered vehicles actively blocking a public roadway and private access points right now. He claims the police are too underfunded to stop him. That last sentence was the absolute clincher. Nothing motivates law enforcement quite like a criminal openly mocking their authority. Is that right? Miller growled softly. What's the address? I gave him the coordinates of my personal hell. Keep your doors locked, Mark. Don't engage with the suspect. I'm dispatching a unit, and I'm coming out there personally. I hung up the phone, walked to my front window, locked the door, and waited for the show to begin. 45 minutes later, the absolute silence of the cul-de-sac was broken by the low rumble of heavy engines. 2 distinct county sheriff's cruisers rolled down the street, completely devoid of sirens or flashing lights. They parked perfectly parallel, effectively boxing in Kyle's entire property and his fleet of automotive junk. From my vantage point at the living room window, it was a cinematic masterpiece. Deputy Miller stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a tall, imposing man with a thick gray mustache, a stern expression, and the hardened demeanor of an officer who had zero tolerance for suburban nonsense. I grabbed my thick black binder, unlocked my front door, and walked out onto my porch. The commotion had already drawn Kyle out of his house. He sauntered down his driveway wearing his signature designer sunglasses, exuding an air of extreme, unwarranted confidence. "Afternoon, officers," Kyle declared, flashing a slick, practiced smile. "Look, if this is about the parking, I already told my neighbor here that we're getting it sorted out. Just a little miscommunication between bros, you know? No need for the heavy artillery." Deputy Miller didn't smile back. He didn't even blink. He adjusted his heavy utility belt, looked at the rusted cars bleeding oil into the street, and then turned his gaze entirely to me. I walked forward, holding the binder out like an absolute weapon. "Deputy Miller? I'm Mark. Here is the complete physical evidence file we discussed on the phone." Miller took the massive binder from my hands, feeling its sheer weight. He flipped it open right on the hood of his cruiser, revealing the meticulous, neon-tabbed sections, the high-definition photographs, and the spreadsheet of illegal transactions. Kyle's practiced smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror as he stared at the mountain of evidence documenting his secret life. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as the reality of the situation crashed over him. Deputy Miller slowly closed the binder, turning his piercing gaze back to Kyle. "Well now, Kyle," Deputy Miller rumbled, his voice carrying clearly across the quiet street. "This doesn't look like a simple parking dispute. This looks like multiple violations of commercial zoning laws, operating an unlicensed dealership, massive tax evasion through title jumping, and the illegal dumping of hazardous materials into a municipal waterway." The color drained entirely from Kyle's face. He stammered, raising his hands defensively. "Wait, no, that's entirely out of context. Those are just my personal project cars. I'm just a hobbyist." Miller pulled out his citation pad. "A hobbyist who conducts cash transactions at 3 in the morning using unlicensed flatbeds? We'll let the county tax assessor and the Environmental Protection Board sort out those details. Right now, every single vehicle on this street without a valid registration and title in your exact name is being impounded immediately." As if on cue, the front door of Kyle's house flew open, and Brittany stormed out. She took one look at the police cruisers, the thick binder on the hood, and my calm expression, and completely lost her mind. "You!" she screamed at me, her face contorting with rage. "You called the cops over a driveway? You are ruining our lives. We are trying to make a living, you selfish monster." Before I could even respond, a sharp, delightful cackle echoed from across the street. Mrs. Higgins was sitting comfortably on her porch in a floral lawn chair, sipping a tall glass of iced tea, watching the entire meltdown like it was front-row theater. "Oh, pipe down, Brittany," the elderly woman shouted gleefully. "We all know you're running a junkyard. Enjoy the fines." The absolute humiliation of the moment was devastating. Kyle was desperately trying to silence his screaming wife, begging the deputies for a break, frantically trying to explain away the undeniable paper trail I had handed them. The neighborhood had finally had enough, and the law was entirely on our side. The sound of heavy diesel engines suddenly echoed from the top of the street. It wasn't just one tow truck. It was a coordinated fleet of 6 massive county impound vehicles rolling down the hill in perfect formation. Kyle fell to his knees on his manicured lawn, clutching his head in absolute despair as the operators systematically hooked heavy steel chains to his precious, illegal inventory. They dragged the rusted Honda, the moldy Camry, the dented Elantra, and the massive box truck out of the neighborhood one by one. The total fines levied against Kyle that afternoon were catastrophic. Between the citations for running an unpermitted commercial business, the severe penalties for environmental dumping into the storm drains, and the massive impound fees for 6 unregistered vehicles, he was facing tens of thousands of dollars in debt. Furthermore, Deputy Miller officially forwarded my binder to the state tax authority for a comprehensive audit regarding the title jumping fraud. Kyle's illicit, underground business was entirely dismantled in less than 2 hours. He didn't look at me, and he didn't say a single word as the final truck hauled away the last remnants of his empire. He just stood on his empty driveway, looking like a completely broken man. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere on our street transformed dramatically. The chaotic noise, the late-night flatbeds, and the constant smell of burning motor oil were entirely gone. Kyle and Brittany practically became ghosts. They avoided eye contact, never parked outside, and quietly put a for sale sign in their front yard just 2 months later. The financial ruin of the fines and the impending tax audits had forced them to abandon the neighborhood entirely. One evening, I stood on my porch, enjoying a cold craft beer in the twilight. My driveway was wide, pristine, and completely empty. For the first time since I bought the property, I felt truly at home. The sweet, unbroken silence of the cul-de-sac was the greatest reward I could have ever asked for. The battle was completely over, and the good guys had actually won. Looking back at the entire ordeal, I realized that my biggest initial mistake was trying too hard to be the accommodating, flexible neighbor. I confused basic politeness with a dangerous lack of boundaries. People like Kyle operate entirely on the assumption that regular folks will actively avoid conflict at all costs. They push, take, and encroach, betting that your desire for peace will override your right to your own property. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, dealing with a deeply entitled neighbor who refuses to respect basic boundaries, do not engage in petty retaliation. Do not key their cars, do not scream in the street, and do not try to reason with them using logic they fundamentally reject. Instead, become a silent observer who documents absolutely everything. Buy high-quality security cameras, log every single interaction, research your local zoning ordinances, and build a quiet, undeniable mountain of evidence. Law enforcement and city officials are frequently overwhelmed, and they often ignore vague complaints. But if you hand them a perfectly organized, documented case file wrapped in a neat bow, they will drop the hammer with absolute precision. My house is now a sanctuary again. Mrs. Higgins still waves from across the street every morning, and the new family that moved into Kyle's old house are quiet, respectful teachers who actually park in their own garage. The ordeal taught me a brutal but necessary lesson about standing up for myself and protecting what I've earned. You work entirely too hard to feel like a hostage in your own home. Protect your peace, defend your property lines, and never underestimate the absolute, devastating power of a heavily organized IT professional with a 3-inch binder and a severe lack of sleep. Thank you for taking the time to read my story, and I hope it helps someone out there. I hope my story gives you the courage to finally take your driveway back.